Have you ever felt lost, confused, or indecisive, and then suddenly a feather just appeared in your path and instantly you just knew the answer to all of your questions? Or maybe friends and family keep buying you animal themed things and you're wondering, why do I have like 10 pairs of frog knickers or owl cushions? And you want to understand, why is this animal turned up in my life? Or perhaps an animal has appeared to you in a dream and you're wondering, what does this symbolize? What does this mean? How can this help me with my current challenge or obstacle? This is why I have created the YouTube series Animal with myself and guests. It's going to offer you insight into what is the magic, the myth, the medicine of the animal kingdom. What does it mean to have a spirit guide that is a particular animal, and how can they support you in your life's journey, in your healing, and in your connection to self? So whether you are seeking an animal guide, or you want to understand yours better, or maybe even yourself better, or perhaps you're just curious about the symbology, the mythology, the wisdom, medicine, and magic of animals, then this is the perfect series of interviews for you. An easy and accessible way to understand the relevance of animal spirit guides to you, along with practical tips and tools for integrating the wisdom of animals into your everyday life and into your spiritual practice. Now let us fly, gallop, and dive into this episode and the support and inspiration that will empower you. Welcome to this episode of Animal. In this episode, I have Imelda with me, who is a fellow Moon Books author, and I'm super excited to have her here as a guest. So Imelda is a forest witch and runs her own forest school, which I wish I could be a part of. I love running wild with people in the woods. She is an international teacher of sacred art and the Old Norse traditions of Scandinavia, including ancestral and indigenous spiritual material from Northern Europe. She's also a painter and an author of 10 books. And I encourage you, once you've watched this episode, to go out and check her art, because it is stunningly beautiful. And in this episode, Imelda is going to be sharing about the wisdom of swans. So welcome, Imelda.
Well, thank you for having me. I have so looked forward to this. So let's go.
Fabulous. So I'd love for you to begin sharing with our audience, what is the magic of swans? So what makes them unique? What is their unique magic and medicine?
Yeah, I mean, where to start? There's so many aspects. And the first thing I would say is that they are psychopomps, or soul conductors. That they swim between the worlds, they move between the worlds with ease, and that means they often come forward when people die, to sort of guide them to the land of the dead and to bring them home in the other world. So that are soul conductors. That's a huge piece for me. For me, there's also a personal connection to my dead mother, and I will talk about that a bit further in this interview, because after she died, only a few weeks after she died, and I am Dutch and she was in the Netherlands, so we did the funeral and all of that, and I went back to Sweden to my forest house and forest school, and I found this swan skeleton, and that had meaning because of some other story I'll also tell a little bit later. But that actually led to the gift of 2 swan bone flutes, because I could send the swan bones, the shoulder bones, off to an artist friend who made me 2 swan bones. And I often played them on the shore of the Baltic Sea. Swans were often used in Mesolithic burials, like say if a baby died, they would use the wing of a swan to cradle it and sort of put it to rest. So that was already going on, and I just that glimpse into the spirituality of the Middle Stone Age, it takes my breath away. It's so beautiful. And last but not least, we have these many myths about swan maidens, especially in Norse mythology and Norse cosmology. And there we also see the psychopomp or soul conductor dimension, because some of these Valkyries flying over the battlefields together with the goddess Freya, who's one of the pickers of the slain, and Odin is the other one. Some of these Valkyries are said to be swan maidens, so there is a close connection between swan maidens and Valkyries, and at least some of them are swan maidens as well. And then, so, you very directly see that links to like dead people and being right there, so you can help them on their journey to the land of the dead.
That's fascinating.
And then wind instruments, swan bone flutes, wind instruments, music made from wind.
Wow. Yeah, you can see how they all connect with kind of the idea of the element of air is often connected with the crone and the passing, isn't it? Of the, the soul leaving as like an air element. But when you were talking, I was thinking about I've heard of, I don't know much, you know way more than me, but about the swan song, like the last song that the swan gives, before they die. And it always felt like a really a beautiful thing to give your last song, before you pass on, almost like a legacy or an accumulation of everything coming forth. And often they symbolize beauty, don't they? I remember one of the first times that I heard the word swan was in reference to Edith Swanneck, the wife of Harold, back when I was in school. I remember hearing that in the history lessons, and it was like denoting that she was so beautiful. And I actually think about that, the beauty of passing, the beauty of that crone transition.
Yeah, but also like when a swan dies and then is eventually reduced to a pile of bones. And then if you take the bones where it's possible, that's not all of them, but it's like the shoulder bones, sometimes the leg bones, and you make a flute from them, that's also a kind of rebirth where the swan finds his or her, its voice again, and like the sound sort of source again. So yeah, I love it in, I love it in all dimensions and in all examples. It's so rich.
So do you think that swans would be a guide that would come forward for people if they were experienced kind of death in all its forms? So not just, I don't want people to be scared thinking, oh, I saw a swan and I'm going to die, but it kind of, we have death,
It's swans in city parks,
some people kind of can be worried about omens, because we have the superstition, don't we, that's come through from like the Christian era about kind of like we see things and a raven, a crone, it's going to mean death, but we go through death every day, don't we? So can swans help us in all death transitions?
Well, I believe that. And as I said, first thing, just to be very clear, it's not like, oh, I see a swan in my city park, or there is one swan in the sea, and now I'm doomed to die. Yeah, you will die one day, but probably not today. So it is, first of all, the everyday sightings of animals, and we just enjoy their, company and their presence. But also, I think when any animal, in this case, swan, becomes more prominent, you're in relationship with that animal, you start seeing it more often, you may start dreaming about it. That is what happened to me. I had a very significant dream, and a whole story followed from that. And yes, I do believe, and not only for deaths on water, and I do believe all human beings have a closer soul connection to some animal species than other animal species. I think we all sort of know who our animal tribe are, if we are that way inclined, if we think about it. So I absolutely believe that, for many people, it really is swan who comes forward, in that moment of death. But I've also seen that with beluga whales and with other animals, or more famously, according to mythology, it would be dogs, ravens, horses. But there are other animals as well who do this. So, and I personally think, and this sometimes makes me I've been told I'm a bit cutting edge, I do a lot of death preparation work with clients. That's like a part of what I do when people have been given a terminal diagnosis and they know they only have months to live. I often end up working with them. And then one of the things you can do is you can start, just like say when a child starts nursery school and you take them on like little visits to get used to the environment. You can do that with death as well. You can use shamanic journeying techniques and music and other things. And rather than people like death is the great unknown or the black hole that they fall into, depending on how they see it, you can actually work with people where you start putting things in place. You take them on little trips there, little visits, and you agree with certain beings on the other side, for instance, swans or swan maidens, that they will come forward. And then what you start doing, you start setting up a good death, and also people have some idea what's going to happen in that moment of death. It's not the black hole opening up.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. So kind of like the maiden aspect is that which offers hope, that it's not like death is the end. It's this transition, this
Mhm.
alchemy kind of transmutation into something new. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, death is always a rebirth, but it's hard to see that. And death can be quite confronting and difficult. It can be hard to remember, but death is always a rebirth. Yeah. And it's also death is a birth back into the spirit world. And our sort of human birth is like we leave the spirit world and we come into this reality.
Yeah, beautiful. Oh, thank you, swans. It we've been talking a lot about different animal guides in this series, and it amazes me just like how they're so suited to offering such great support to certain situations, and every situation that we go through as humans, there is an animal guide for like everything.
Yeah.
Like, every step of the way we are supported, we are loved by something. And it's lovely that we have this animal of beauty and grace and, with us, during these times of death, definitely. Yeah, wonderful. So you've mentioned a few of like deities that are connected to swans. So could you speak, a bit more about some of them? Because I know that a lot of people love to connect to deities through their animal kind of guides or totems or symbology. And, some deities do actually even turn into animals, because they embody their characteristics. So could you go a little bit more in depth into some of the deities that are connected with swans? Or maybe
Well, the
just share a
swan
little bit.
maidens are, sorry, there's a bit of a sound, like I'm hearing a bit of an interference or a bit of a buzzing sound.
That's fine. Is
Not
that
now.
better?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll
So
just put the
just in
volume down.
case,
I might have been shouting at you.
oh no, but if you end up editing it later, it'd be a shame if a whole part of the interview was obliterated. But now it's fine. I hear absolutely nothing. But like, well, swan maidens, and like they are like deities or spirits. That's always a whole question in its own right. Also, in the past, if you go back through history, there is also a connection between swan and geese. Now, I know that geese are different animals, but they're kind of like a bit in the same family. And then you get figures such as I'm very intrigued by Mother Goose in Europe and how she was used. And actually, I think may even have been a Moonbooks author who wrote a whole book about it. I didn't check it before I came on. I don't have the details. You can probably find it if you want to put it in the show notes. But this author did this whole piece of investigation into who Mother Goose was and what actually happened there. And she goes all the way back through history. But then you realize that, as you will be aware as well, we had this time of Christianity, then we had the Inquisition, we had the witch trials and all of that. And there was so much knowledge that it wasn't safe for people to pass on anymore because people were losing their lives for that. And then one of the things that happened there is that a lot of that information was filed away under fairy tales and nursery rhymes under the figure of Mother Goose. And and that's why we still have it in like children's songs and nursery rhymes. But then if you go even further back, and then she feels like a harmless with figure, because the thing is, material for children is not censored the same way as material for adults, and that's how it's sort of it's still with us today. But if you go further back, both with the Swan Maidens and Mother Goose, and you go into that, I was talking about the Stone Age earlier, then you find, there's like a Neolithic bird goddess, and that's maybe the ancestral deity that underlies the whole template of both Swan Maidens and Mother Goose. And Swan Maidens also sit in a global tradition where all over the world you have like selkies, you have in Japan, you have like the fox wife. It happens with bears and other animals as well. But this whole idea of an animal like taking human form or partial human form, so they're a hybrid, and then they always have that challenge of existing in two worlds at the same time and walking that edge. That can be quite a painful existence. And then they meet up with a human and marry a human. Sometimes they even have children. That's what happens to the swan maidens in Norse mythology. And then, their husbands hide their swan cloaks, their feathered cloaks in the attic. But then one day the desire to fly again and to come home to the world of spirit is so great that, the story is all of different details depending on the animal, but they find their swan clothes again, and one day they fly off because they can't take the restriction of human existence and they want to have the open skies and go home. So that's how these stories usually end. So swans also have a very huge, like, hybrid energy, the being in two worlds at the same time.
Yeah, fabulous. It's amazing how like animals, can turn up in lots of different cultures, and yet there's this kind of thread that kind of weaves them all together, and it brings like this universality to us as well. So you can see something in one culture and one tradition, and you're like, oh, it affirms something within us that we're all going through the same kind of like journey, I suppose.
Yeah, and it also indicates that I personally believe that, we now live in a very scientifically informed consciousness. That's the so-called product of, the Enlightenment. Though not all of that, I think, was enlightening, but, that's a whole other story. But if you go back, I primarily teach material from the Viking Age, and do other periods as well, but I'm a teacher of all that Old Norse material. And what you just see if you read all the, the history books or the runic inscriptions is people lived in a much higher level of magical consciousness. They paid attention to animals in a different way. The language of synchronicities was still a natural language for them. And also, I think what you just said, it's also, it's wired within us, but that was also because our ancestors had such a lively relationship with this material. And, in a way, long time ago, like many myths say, from all over the world, even like the Inuit, that there was a time, a very long time ago, of our deep ancestors, but there wasn't a great dividing line yet between animals and human beings and even deities, and that they sort of all walked the world and they were still shape-shifting. But like we are so locked into our human bodies now that we have we can still do it. I teach it to my students, but it doesn't always come naturally to us to shape-shift, claim our animal selves.
Wonderful. Sorry, I was so into what you were saying then. I was just like,
oh, nice. That's a compliment. I like it.
Absorbed. Fabulous. So that was a really good introduction. Thank you for kind of, what swan means to different cultures. And I'd love for you to share now kind of like what swan really means for you. And you've given us some kind of like hints and insights already.
Yes, I did.
Yeah. How has swan turned up in your life? Like, why is swan special for you?
Yeah, well, I have other animals too, so it's not even an exclusive relationship, to use a modern dating term, but at my forest house and forest school in Sweden in 2017, I had one of these like significant dreams. And in that dream, I was the observer, and I was shown how there was a swan maiden who had just died, and there was a little baby there as well, so presumably a young woman, still in the teenage years, like maybe 18, 19. But they had children very young in those days. And she and her infant had died in childbirth. But my dream was about it. The death had already happened. My dream was about how the swan spirit came forward and collected them, and they sort of soared, and they started this whole new life in the world of spirit. But also, it was very, very clear that there was this continuation of consciousness after death. That, what we said a moment ago, that death is really a birth at the same time. And I woke up from that dream and I did a little sketching because I'm an artist. And, but I'm also quite real world. I do a lot of shamanic work, but I like it to be rooted in reality. So now I'm going to do some real world research. And it was typed in all the details from the dream, like the age of the young woman and of the baby, that there was a connection to swans, etc. And then what came up was an article about, a grave from the Mesolithic and Middle Stone Age era. It was found in Weetbeek, that's a place in Denmark, just north of Copenhagen. And there the body, in real life, the body of a young woman was found, and with her was the body of a premature baby. It had not gone full term. It was believed that both had died in that process of childbirth. And the baby was cradled in the wing of a whooper swan. So it was curled up in the wing of the swan, so lying next, just lying next to the young woman like that. and he also was given a little flint knife. And the mother had grave goods as well. So she had like ornaments, like necklaces and things made from shells and the teeth of local animals, like bear, deer, moose, wild boar, all the animals that I still see around my house today. And their bodies had been sprinkled with red ochre. And we're talking about the Middle Stone Age. So that's something like between 10,000 and 4,000 years, like before CE, like before Christ, you're a Christian. So that's how long ago this is. And then, the archaeologists who opened the grave, and there were other graves as well, it's like a grave field, they sort of said that the swan sling probably indicates this ancient belief in swans as psychopomps, the soul conductors we already talked about. And I was just so deeply touched by that. And this is really, my boys liked swans, but this is where swans came into my life. And also in the dream, there was this gorgeous music playing, and I knew it was a swan bone flute. It was a very unique tone, a very unique music. And I just had a craving for my own swan bone flute. But you don't go on Etsy and order yourself a swan bone flute, and they're like protected animals. And, you don't just go out and buy a swan bone flute. It's not an instrument you see in a mainstream orchestra. So I just so that was 2017. And then we fast forward to August 2022. At that point, my mother dies. And only a few weeks later, I find a swan skeleton on an uninhabited island in the archipelago on our doorstep. This is the east coast of Sweden. And I had an artist friend who said, he'd made swan bone flute before because he'd found a dead swan. And because I thought, if I do something with these bones and I start drilling holes, I'll probably destroy the bones. And unfortunately, I've been stupid. I left the swan bone flutes in Sweden because I thought, if I travel with them too much, there's always a risk they get damaged, so that the customs take them. Not so much in Europe, but in the US, you would be at risk of that. But I have since had another swan as a gift from my mother. So this is actually the bone that such a flute is made from. So this is about to come in the post, and I'm going to send him another bone to make a flute from. And this is the shoulder bone. So it's like the humerus bone, which is like our upper arm bone. So that's what it's made from. So I can show you that.
It's really big. It's bigger than I thought it would be.
It is, yeah, but also, whooper swans are quite large. Mute swans are smaller. It's not just one swan. They're different, and there's a third swan species, and they're all different sizes. But yeah, it is almost the size of my own upper arm. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
So anyway, my mother died, and I dreamed around the whole thing where it was clear that my mother was giving me that swan. Then my friend makes me these two swan bone flutes, and I was back. I went to Shetland, where he lives and works, to collect them. And then I found myself back on the shores of the Baltic Sea, playing my swan bone flutes for the swans. And doing that, sometimes the swans would come, there's something about the tone, because it doesn't sound like a normal flute. It has a very eerie, special sound. They would come. And I've since also found other dead swans lying on the coast. And what I always do to honor swan is if I have the flutes with me, I always try to do when I walk by the sea, I play like a requiem. I kept out my swan bone flutes, and I sort of play a song to put into rest. And the way swan helps human beings make the transition into the other world. When I see a dead swan, I see it as my responsibility to play the swan bone flute and sort of make that transition for them easier, going back to the other world. And then a few more years have passed. We're now in 2025, and I've now discovered that every year on the anniversary of her death, my mother sends me a dead swan or a pile of swan bones. So this is now a recurrent event, and it's become the main way I'm in touch with my mother in the other world. She communicates through swans and giving me swan bones. So yeah.
That's beautiful. What a lovely way to connect to her as well, through this specific animal, and it's a very kind of accessible animal, isn't it? I think, compared to some, it's not like, say if a bear came up, we'd be a little bit more hesitant, but yeah, what beautiful. Yeah, no, it's beautiful. Thank you. It sounds like they've had a really a profound impact, in contribution to your life, but in a very kind of gentle way as well, almost like being kind of gracefully kind of swimming alongside you.
Yeah, I love that. I hadn't thought of it. I think you're just giving me an idea for a painting, or at least a pen and ink sketch. thank you for that.
It's kind of how I kind of saw you just kind of like, just gracefully, just kind of like side by side, like you never like, you see with some animals, like especially with dogs, like they'll headbutt each other out of the way, won't they? But when you watch swans, they're always gliding side by side.
Yeah.
And if a mate kind of goes away, they'll just glide with them. There's no like, I need to catch up. They just glide. And it's like, that kind of the feet are working really hard underneath, but you don't see that. You see all the, or, you just see that kind of like floating.
It looks so elegant, but they're working really hard under the water, as you say. So that's another thing. It looks easy in this reality. There's so much work done in the reality underwater, which in some cultures is also a form of underworld. So yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose that's a spiritual lesson for us, isn't it? That, we all kind of want things to be easy, don't we? And we're all kind of just wanting more ease. And I can't go through the hard bits and I can't go through the difficult bits, but actually that grace of the swan comes from the working hard, from the pedaling away in the depths of the water. That beauty above is all being powered by that strength from being in the underworld and the underneath.
It is, and also the hardships are what sculpt us. We often like to think we're the sculptor and we're in control, but leading a spirit-led life, I often think I'm only like the material. There is a divine sculptor or sculptress, if you like, at work. And sort of, when I feel pain, it's just someone like carving me into a better shape. It can be hard to hold on to when things get really difficult, but that's how I try to see it, that this is making a contribution to the evolution of my consciousness in some way.
Lovely, thank you for sharing that. Okay, so if somebody has been inspired by this and thinks, wow, I really want to somehow connect to Swan, how could they begin, start connection with Swan? How could they reach out? Are there certain things they could do? We were talking before about them connecting perhaps to the air element. Maybe that would be
the element of air and water, because they live on the boundary, and then earth is there as well. Fire, not so much, because they do come ashore also. They're not always in the water, but they spend most of their time gliding and paddling. So they're right on that edge. It's another liminal zone. It's another boundary between air and water, and where they interact. So that is a thing. And also, as you said, they're quite common animals. I mean, not all over the world, but in many places, at least in the northern hemisphere. So, if at all possible, go to a place where swans are. Doesn't matter if that's your local park, And then just observe them. You may want to bring a sketchbook. I would also just sit there, and I always carry both a sketchbook and a notebook, so I can both sketch and write. And I would just sit in quiet meditation with them and just say, I open myself to communication for you, just you connect. Also, when you connect with animals, I always suggest that you introduce yourself like you do with a human. So if I'm working with a new animal or animal species, I would just, be respectful, not crowd them, maybe from a little distance, use animal communication, and then convey hi, I'm Imelda. Would you allow me to spend some time with you? I'd like to get to know you. I'd like to, learn from you. There's something you want to share. And that nearly always works really well, because animals, they like being approached in a respectful way, as I'm sure you've heard from lots of other guests on your podcast. So that's how I would do it in the real world. Make sketches, right? I would ask other people, please tell me swan stories, and people will have stories about swans, or, some of these stories will be about death, or a grandfather or a grandmother, or a place where they used to live where there were swans, or, all of those kinds of things. And I would say dream intentions, go to bed and sort of say, I'd like to dream with swan tonight. Sit on the edge of the bed, say it aloud 3 times, so it's really cemented. Make sure you keep a notepad by the bed and a pen, so you can just sit on the edge of the bed, write down whatever came. If you have that dream in the middle of the night and you wake up briefly, write it down. You will not be able to retrieve it in the morning, unless you're a very, very good dream diary artist. And then, you have a delightful surprise. You wake up in the morning and you don't remember it, but actually in the middle of the night you wrote about your encounter with swan. And then, paint if you're a spiritual person into ceremonies, put a swan item on your altar, maybe ask to connect with that, make little offerings, meditate on what the medicine of swan is, what the energy of swan is. mean, I could go on. This podcast has a limited time frame, but there are so many things you could do.
And is there a way, do you think, to put it a different way? Do you think there would be a difference if people were trying to connect to Swan, maybe in its aspect of kind of like the death and then the maiden? Would you kind of approach them differently, you know, if they were embodying that kind of different stage, you know, well, you know, as the younger than as the old?
I think what I mean, and I have taught like sacred art retreats about swan maidens. So I've like had art students in the room, and we've all worked with swan maidens. So you know, this is something you can do. But when I do that, I do it in a little bit more of an organized way. And then I would use techniques such as music, shamanic journeying, things like that. And as people to do, you know, in my kind of teaching, shamanic teaching, to do a shamanic journey to a swan maiden. But I also then back that up that we do ceremonies. I often ask the students to make themselves a costume, like however simple. I mean, people think, oh, a costume. But you know, you could sort of turn a cereal box inside out and do cut out and some glue, and you could like have a crown with two swans in it. I mean, like, you know, almost anything you find in the recycling or in the bin, you know, if you're really creative, you used to, or, you know, make a very simple costume. And, you know, we've even done that work on Zoom while the pandemic was going on. And, you know, we always do like witnessing on the level of soul, where every participant like takes center stage, be it in reality, even better, but if necessary on Zoom. And they sort of model their costume and they speak as a swan maiden, and, you know, they speak about their life as a swan maiden, the challenges and the duty. And then once all participants have done that, you've learned an awful lot about swan maidens. But a smaller version of that can also be done at home. Make yourself a costume, or instead of dream with swan, set a dream intention, like to dream with a swan maiden. Or if there is a death in your family, say, and you have some concerns, like was this a good death, you know, was the death compromised, or, you know, was it a good death? Did they make their full transition? You could connect with swan energy, and you know, you could call swan forward. You know, someone is dying, and you think, you know, probably want to be sure they have some connection to swan at least. But also, then you can put riders on that. So, you know, if it serves the highest good, if it's right for the, you know, for the greater good of this person, I'm asking swan to come forward. So again, it's unlimited. You know, there are so many ways you could work with this material.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And so many good ideas. So I hope that people go home now and with their homework, they make some costumes, and I hope they send us some pictures because I really want to see.
People put that in the comment section, or really,
Yeah, definitely. Post some pictures of you in your swan crowns. No, we'd love to see that.
Oh, great. Yeah, we want to see that.
And I also like we have two swans near us. And they're an older couple now. They've had babies for years and years and years and years, and every year the heron eats their babies. And I feel so sorry for them. They've got to the point now where they don't have kids anymore, but they're still so full of life and lively. And I go to feed them like every week. And what always surprises me is they'll come along like kind of wiggling their bottoms a little bit, and I'll start feeding them, and then they'll get really vocal. They're like, "Rah, rah," like, you know, they're like, more food. I don't know, you're shouting at me. They're like, yes, I want more food. And they're very, very vocal. And I imagine they would like singing, that they would like kind of like sung to.
They like sound, they like flutes. And what I've done in Sweden, you've got to be very careful, but you know, I like doing some wild swimming, and we are on the doorstep of a lake. And also after I first playing my swanbone flute and introducing myself, you know, gentle approach. But like, I have been swimming and they've come close to the jetty, and at some point I was surrounded by them. So I was essentially swimming with 3 swans, one ahead of me, one either side. And we're like swimming in formation. And at that point you think like, wow. And there's also again that confirmation. But as I said, I would be very careful because swans can also get aggressive and they can attack. So I'm not, also if you have children, don't take them swimming with swans. So this is probably like maybe not something you should do at home. But on these rare occasions where the circumstances line up and it happens, it's absolute magic.
Yeah, it's just about respecting kind of their space, isn't it? We're like with any animal, kind of, they are wild creatures, you know, and you wouldn't, you know, go ahead and throw a piece of bread at a human being, so don't do it at a swan.
No, exactly. And if only we understood that, you know, it's like these are their spaces, and human beings can't just take that as their own. Yeah.
Fabulous. Oh, thank you so much. You've given lots of great ideas for connecting to Swan, and I invite, the audience, those that are watching, to maybe share your own Swan stories, down below in the comments. If you've got any experiences, or your, like Melda said, your family members have any stories, then please do share them with us, and we'd love to hear that, and so would everybody else. So do pop them down in the comments, or if you have any questions at all, anything that you like Imelda to elaborate on, to kind of talk more about, then you can always let us know in the comments below this video. So thank you so much, Imelda, for being a guest and for sharing
Thank you for
all of
having
this
me.
Swan wisdom.
I think your comment section will turn into a book given a bit of time. Wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you, everybody, for watching this episode. And if you're new to this, then please do check out all of the other videos. There are so many animal videos here of animal wisdom, just again affirming all of the magic, the medicine, and also the unconditional love that the animal kingdom has for us in wanting to support and guide us. So go and check out the other videos. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next episode.